me just start off by saying, I have to tell you, I look forward to Thanksgiving so much every year. And now that it's over, I don't want to let it go. And when I think about it, I guess I don't have to let it go. None of us do. Maybe none of us should, because when we speak about gratitude, and we do that often on Refresh, the research tells us about well-being is often tied to better mental health. And when we take the time to count our blessings and share that gratitude with others, well, then giving thanks is a daily holiday, right? It's a refresh, it's a respite. It allows us to reframe and reinvigorate. So in that spirit, I am grateful, so grateful for the opportunity to have met the amazing Kate Johnson and to call her friend. I am proud to serve on the V Foundation Board for Cancer Research and was asked to moderate a panel to celebrate the 50th anniversary. It wasn't this past one, the year before, of Title IX. And while we celebrated progress for women's sports, and we'll talk a little bit about that today, we're also celebrating amazing women who were involved with sports, but were also cancer thrivers. And there she was, Kate. I don't know what it was, Kate, but from that moment on, we've been great friends. She's an Olympian, former Olympian. I guess you're always an Olympian when you're an Olympian. She helped lead the U.S. rowing team to silver medals at the Games in Athens in 2004. She was a world champion, a three-time NCAA All-America at the University of Michigan, where she's also an inductee into their Hall of Fame. By the way, you never get tired of hearing this your whole life, right, Kate? Formerly the Vice President of Global Sponsorship Marketing at Visa. And let me just tell you, for those of you who are not in the world of sports marketing, Visa's the top of the pyramid. And now she leads Google's global sports entertainment marketing partnerships. And by the way, she's ducked out of an important meeting to spend this time with her. So I want to get going with this. Content, media, creating new initiatives, and honestly, leading with not only her smarts, but her heart. Maybe that's what we should create a new group called Leading with Smarts and Heart. Kate, I am so glad you're here. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
My gosh, Donna, if you could do my introduction everywhere I go in life, I will be like thriving beyond belief.
By the
So good to
way,
be here.
you knew that I would do that. You know that I'll just call and I will be there.
You're such a pro.
No doubt about it. Listen, we want to talk a little bit about your story and then what's happening. You're really in the mix of what's happening in the world today, certainly about advertising, in terms of communication, in terms of women's sports and all that. But you were a rower. Did you always want to be a rower?
No, I didn't. I didn't even know rowing existed until I was 12 years old. Right? It's not a sport that's on television. It's not like, I always say that as a human in this world, male or female or you name it, we are like, fully opted in on men's sports from the
Right.
moment we enter this universe. And women's rowing was not, as you would imagine, part of the societal narrative. So I found rowing driving over the Willamette River. We just moved to Portland, Oregon. I was a freshman in high school when I found it, and we were driving over the Willamette River. And I said, Dad, I want to give that a try. I saw these boats on the river, and we turned the car around. I went down to the boathouse, and a phenomenal coach. And I always say this, that it just takes one person telling you when you're young, you're going to be good at this, for it to like start to have some of its hooks in you. And yeah, that was kind of the beginning of my journey, was a 500-meter erg test that this coach made me do when we went down to the boathouse.
Okay, there's little girls, little boys all over this country getting into boats at some point now. Rowing's ever more popular.
Yeah, thankfully.
What creates an Olympian?
Oh my gosh. It's funny. I think about this a lot because I have two boys, and I do. Yeah, you do. I do think there's something around. I do think every Olympic athlete, an elite athlete, and high performing athlete, there is something in them that they come into this world in, this gritty kind of like stick with it nature. Now, I kind of had it, but I wouldn't say that like people would point to me and be like, she's an athlete before I'd found rowing. I was not very hand-eye coordinated. Basketball, Donna, much to your chagrin, was not my jam. They recruited me because I was tall, and then like the ball would bounce off me without me ever catching.
I've seen those athletes.
But I do think that like I think, Olympians there is a thing that turns on in you when you find the thing that sticks. And for me, it like came from it came from the center of my chest. It was like I had found my raison d'etre when I found rowing. I found the thing that like I wanted to get up and do every day. It was the first thing I thought about when I woke up. last thing I thought about when I went to bed. And that I think is the beginning of like making a champion, is just that like that innate hunger for the thing that you found that you love so much and you want to apply yourself to.
Right. Well, it's so interesting that I think about the world every single day, right? You can embrace the world. I want to live every single day. I want to get up. I want to do my best. And yet when when we talk about sports, it has a different kind of feel when we talk about finding the thing or any other passion point. And people
Yeah.
always say, well, how do I find that passion point?
Totally. I actually, it's funny you say that because I remember when I was in university, I went to the University of Michigan, rode there, helped build the women's rowing program there. I was part of the first class of recruited athletes when Michigan went D1. Thank you to Title IX, all of the things. Like we balanced out the men's football program by adding women's rowing. And I remember speaking with a professor, and it was like my Shakespeare professor. And I was like, are you just like in love with Shakespeare? Is that why you got your PhD in Shakespeare? And he's like, Kate, no, that is not why I got my, like I like Shakespeare. But what you found with rowing is really exceptional. And so then, fast forward to my transition into real life when I like retired from being the best in the world at something like rowing that I was like just so fervently passionate about. And it was really hard, like figuring out how to kind of be an adult now in a world where I'd lived with passion and then wanted to find that passion again for something else. That was a difficult transition. And I think when you find that passion, unfortunately, not everyone does, right? So like how I think the question is, how do we keep ourselves open to uh getting in the way of, and serendipitously finding that other thing out there, that can become a passionate endeavor. And so for me it was like going back to the novice mentality, trying a lot of things on. When we grow up doing sports in this country, hopefully you're thrown into a million different sports before you find the thing that sticks. I
Hopefully.
think as adults we forget to do that. I think we forget to put ourselves in that like insatiable curiosity, like willingness to be a novice again and just try some things on. And I think the pandemic actually opened, I was with my team last night and I was asking folks like, "Hey, what is stuck for you that you tried during the pandemic when you were stuck at home, bored out of your gourd, and you had to get creative about like entertaining yourself in new ways or picking up new hobbies? Like, what did you do?" Some people picked up the piano, some people picked up art, some people, and like have those things stuck. It's an interesting one for people to think about. Shouldn't
It
take a pandemic to like,
Yeah, it actually does. I mean, you have to put yourself in the shaker and shake it up. Otherwise, we're just kind of
you.
comfortable where we are. I mean, I think in a way it did. I mean,
Yeah,
think about what the
totally.
pandemic did for your business now, the business you're in now in terms of Google. It set our abilities on fire, right? If we said to people, "Oh, we're going to talk to each other by Zoom," we'd probably be
Yeah,
another 10 years away.
totally. I mean, yes, absolutely. Like just how normalized some of these things have become now because of the pandemic. But I would love to normalize the trying things on as adults.
I
You
love it.
know?
I love it.
Let's do that, Donna. Let's normalize that.
I actually want to start a movement about adults going to college together. Like, let's get a group. Annie Myers Drysdale, by the way. Hello, Annie, one of the great athletes of in all history, joined us. Imagine if we all got a group and just went to college for 9 months, how different it would be now.
God, what would you do? Like,
I would
ask
try
yourself,
a lot of things on.
right? What classes would you take that you kind of like had this narrative going that, nah, that's not real, that's not serious, you know? I think I would
Totally.
have become an
Or
art
this is not
major.
going to get me a job. No, this is going to make me a better life. Right.
Totally.
All those kind
Totally.
of great things. Well, you get to Visa. And as I explained to our community here, Visa was the top of the sports sponsorship pyramid, right? You invested a lot of money in sports. And yet you were a female athlete. Did you feel like at that point in time you were investing dollars against what you wanted to invest them in, that you had to invest them in? What did you
Yeah.
see and learn when you were there?
So there's two things that I think about a lot in my career journey, regarding my time at Visa. One was very personal from like a career path trajectory perspective, where I was a senior director. I was managing this Olympic vertical. And basically my boss looked to start to replace himself. And he was like actively bringing in individuals to interview to replace himself. And I was watching a lot of these gentlemen from the sports marketing industry come in who had been my peers to interview to effectively like now be my boss. And I kind of was scratching my head thinking like, well, wait a minute, like, why am I not in this pool of like candidates. Like I should put myself in this pool of candidates. And very, fortunately, I'd read a quote very like around that time, which is, women are 50% likely to put themselves to go for something they're 90% qualified for, whereas men are 90% likely to go for something they're 50% qualified for. I don't know if like the precise accuracy of that, but the sentiment is so important for women to embrace, which is like,
Totally.
like fake it till you make it. Like if you don't have to be perfect to get the job, like go figure it out. And that was a real turning point for me. I did put my hat in the ring. My boss was like kind of confused. And then he like thought about it and he's like, you're the perfect person to do this job. And, I'd never been to an NFL football game. And then I ended up running the whole team. And my first NFL football game was the Super Bowl that we were a sponsor of. So, you don't have to have been like an expert in NFL to become the head of global sponsorship at Visa is my short story. On the investment side and the like, then using your position of not power, but your position to be a decision maker that can influence like things like where dollars go, how media deals get done, like the bifurcation of like, when you sign a deal, they don't just roll the women's sports into it.
Right.
You get to be thoughtful about like, well, maybe I don't want the men's team. Maybe I want the women's part of that league, right? NBA, WNBA, great example of that. And so where that part of like me really exercising that influence that I now had began at Visa when we were negotiating a USA soccer deal. It was ahead of the 2019 Women's World Cup. We've been a longtime FIFA partner, and finally we'd done the internal sell-in to say we're going to really stand up the Women's World Cup this year, and in that part of our FIFA partnership at Visa. But to do that, we wanted to sponsor the best team in the world, which was the U.S. women's soccer team. And at that time, if you recall, you could not decouple the U.S. women's team from the men's team. There was no Cindy Parlow-Cone at the helm, shaking people to reason. And so at Visa, we had to work very hard to negotiate that no less than I only wanted the women. They wouldn't let me have just the women. And so we put in the contract that no less than 51% of our sponsorship dollars would go towards the women's team. And that was as good as they would.
And what year was this? This is incredible to me because I never heard this backstory before. You had to stipulate. In what year?
2019. But even stipulating that was very hard because they were like,
Wow.
well, how can you
Wow.
audit this? And anyway, the point is now those things are decoupled. You can sponsor the women and not have to sponsor the men. And but then just to fast forward, then I took that into my job at Google, where you imagine Google's a beast. And like what I always say is Visa was on one end of the spectrum where we had built the global brand off the back of these like integrated marketing partnerships, long-term relationships with the IOC, FIFA, the NFL, New York Fashion Week, like things like that, right? And then you get over to Google where we're like, we don't have a brand awareness problem, but for younger generations and for users, we do have like a feature understanding problem. Very few people understand like all the tools and features that are available to you that are like just mind blowing in that little search bar.
Mhm.
Lens, shopping, you name it. And so where's the right place to like ingratiate yourself and help educate, show, don't tell about these sports? Because you've got these avid fans that are hungry to go deeper into the thing that they're watching and that they love. And so we started this journey with Google, actually with the WNBA, because I was like, look, this is low risk. We can only win by partnering with the WNBA. And it was, great that actually what it did was we started with the women, not the men. We got to test and learn with the women, not the men. Like and like the WNBA was an amazing partner to like work with to try out how do we bring shopping to life. So anyway, I could go down a rabbit hole on all the things I'm proud of that we've done there that make me so pumped. But also we had to like make sure that we had a three-party conversation there, that it wasn't just the brand and the WNBA coming into a deal. We brought ESPN into the narrative too, because my big beef, as is everyone's, is that there's not enough women's sports content out there to actually right size your investment numbers to anything that's remotely equal between investing in men's versus women's. And so what do? Our job was with ESPN and the WNBA to create more content so that more brands could invest, so that there is more visibility. So we actually underwrote production of incremental games to go live that year through our partnership with ESPN. And that's kind of become a blueprint for a lot of what we do and for other brands.
Which is great. And now, and you've also expanded, right? You've also expanded how you're getting involved in women's sports. And part of the tsunami, I think, of movement, right? I think
Yes.
it's funny. I'd love to know what Annie thinks, because Annie, I think, does call the Phoenix Mercury games still. Um,
Awesome.
but it's be all right. Look, and then we had the great ruling on women's soccer, right? 50-50, which was
Yep.
really important. And NWSL, Jessica Berman's doing an unbelievable job, and we're showing momentum. How are people changing their stories? How are you here? What are you hearing now? Just curious.
How are you like which people? You mean like on the brand side, on the like, or just the general?
Just in general, right? There's always been the naysayers. There's always, and they're generally louder than the positive support.
Yeah.
And now I'm just reading lots more articles about, like, this is a place to invest.
Oh, I mean, here's what I would say. I think a couple of things. First of all, I think for a long time the numbers, it always helps to bring data into conversations with people whose minds you need to change, whose hearts and minds you need to influence. And so coming in with the data, right? Like our journey was, hey, only 4% of sponsorship dollars go towards women's sports. Only less than 5% of the of like coverage of sports is of women's sports, right? Like we Google have the ability to influence that. So taking that into conversations was very helpful. I'm very proud that Wasserman and Thayer Lavalle over there has like put out a new report that basically says we've improved that. Like now 12% of content on television. I think it's 12. It might even be higher.
I read 12 the other day, and I was like,
Yeah.
what? How did that
Yeah.
happen?
So the 4 has gone up to 12, right? And I credit like so many of these brands that have jumped in, especially in the last 3 to 5 years, and are really pushing on the media side to make sure there's more visibility. But also like the thing that I think the narrative and what brands are getting from a business sense perspective. I actually was on a Goldman Sachs panel with speaking to private wealth, family foundations, investors about where's the right place to put your money right now. 100% it's in women's sports. Look at Alexis Ohanian. All you have to do is like Google any comment that comes out of his mouth as far as like what he's put into Angel City and like how that return on investment has paid off for him. Like women's sports is only a high growth opportunity, and it's like only going to continue. There's like finally now this momentum behind it, and I think you are seeing the right players step in to make the ecosystem more rich, and to therefore make the investment opportunity healthier and less of like a what felt like, well, what is the future going to be? I think we can all see that the future is that there's significant momentum here.
I wish you can say, when you say we all, I truly wish it was we all. I think you're still
No,
leading,
you're still,
and right, you're still out there leading and showing, creating
yeah.
proof points. But from an individual perspective, as a leader, you come from one company, you get to know Google is a beast, as you said, and yet they didn't have any of this experience, and you step into a new place, and you want to bring them to a new place. As a leader, how do you do that? Because I'm sure that you didn't say, "Oh wow, this is a great idea," and everybody said, "Let's go do this." I'm sure you had to do a lot of internal convincing of how this could move forward, how this made sense.
Yeah. Okay, so one of the data points that I like to share is I always say sports is the fastest way to accelerate women at scale.
Mm.
Period. So what does that mean? That means like when you look at the C-suite, and Google has been largely caught up in a lot of these conversations, Visa too, like, hey, we need our senior leadership to look different. We need more diversity, right? We need more minority representation. So actually, when you think about it, it was 2020 when I sold in the WNBA, Black Lives Matter, right? Like the country, the cultural zeitgeist was kind of like receiving and more aware of like, oh man, we really need to do a hard look at like, are we walking the walk while we talk the talk? And when you do the internal audit on those things, a lot of companies are not. And so I kind of use that moment in time to bring in the WNBA, which represents all those things, right?
Yep.
That need to be right sized: diversity, equity, inclusion, like, and then also just like a really smart investment that's really exciting that people get into and like get fired and like has amazing fandom. I also brought in data around how like fans of women's sports, for what I do, it's such a smart place to invest because fans of women's sports, and here's something I think is really interesting, like that we need to do a better job of, where there's still a lot of room. I think we do make the mistake in the women's sports landscape to kind of group like fans of women. Women's sports is not its own vertical, just like men's sports is not its own vertical. You are a fan of basketball, you are a fan of soccer, you are a fan of. However, the fans that follow basketball, women's basketball, the fans that follow women's soccer, they do tend to have behaviors that are they're more, because they have to work so hard to find what they want to watch. They
Yeah.
are more open to adopting technology. And so that's great for Google. That was one of my big selling points, was like, and they pay you back tenfold in terms of loyalty because they're so grateful that, and not grateful in like, oh, thank you so much for caring about our sport, but like, they see brands rolling into women's sports and doing like authentic work there and really standing it up. Look at Ally and Andrea Brimmer and what she's doing over there. Like, and so when you do a good job at it, you're not just a logo slap. Like, you know, users care about that, fans care about that, and the loyalty is there, and they're more likely to purchase from you as well. So I took that kind of insight and married it against the product areas within Google that need that, like Google Pixel, right? We are third in market by a long shot behind Apple and Samsung. And so, like, how do you do that? Let's like insert ourselves in sports and embed ourselves and ingratiate ourselves to these fans and bring them closer to what they love in a way that's like really authentic. They'll pay us back, and they have. It's been awesome.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Everybody, welcome to Refresh. Taking a little bit of a breath here. We're with Kate Johnson, currently the lead of global sports and entertainment for Google, a former Olympian. Her heart's with women and women in sports, as well as entertainment. And I wanted to say that's all you are,
Yeah.
because you are just this magnificent human with a broad breadth of interests and caring and sharing. However, in terms of your advice, right? So you're a young female athlete, or you're a brand who wants to get involved. What would you tell people? How should they pursue their passion?
Yeah. So I think this goes back to kind of where we started the conversation, which is around like the novice mentality. The, you know, I think we oftentimes feel stuck in the path that we're in, and yet what I would say is like paying attention to the things that give you energy and following those cues in life is like the fastest way to find yourself in a more like, that's where the magic will happen. That's where like the law of attraction will kind of begin to play out, right? Like if you are, you know, commenting on things that excite you, that give you energy, if you're in social media, if you're connecting on LinkedIn around the things that excite you, I think that's the way that we can find ourselves out of feeling stuck and into the things that give us more energy, is like paying attention to that and like in like involving yourself in it, because from there you're going to have more conversations about the things you're passionate about. You're going to set up coffee dates and informational interviews around the things you're passionate about. And that, in my experience, is where I've been able to kind of like find myself in the way of the things that I want to be doing most of all. I always say I've never applied for a job. I've actually never applied for a job. All of my jobs have come out of personal connections and contacts, and frankly, showing up as my very authentic self in informational interviews and in connections with people. And then they lead to discussions around, like, well, would you consider this? Would you consider that? Or people sending things my way where they're like, I think you might be interested in this. So that's what I would say. I would say if you're early in your career, just, you know, I think one of the best things I did was I started an agency, which meant I got to try on a lot of things. Like I was an Olympian. I was transitioning out of being an Olympian. I really didn't know which way I wanted to go. What I did know is I wanted to be a part of teams. I loved having a focused goal and working towards it. So that lent uh, me towards like following up on project work a little bit more. And then I knew I wanted to continue to see the world. And so like finding jobs that enabled me to travel, those were kind of like my three basic criteria when I started. Then
Right.
you
Oh, you
rotate
wanted to
into
travel. You wanted to travel. Right, right, right.
wanting to travel.
So let me ask you something quick, because we don't I know you have to get back to your
Yeah.
conference. But you were struck down, right? You received a diagnosis, and we should talk about, you are a cancer thriver.
Yes.
And all of these skills as an athlete, how did they come to play for you? How did you move from that moment of discovery, unexpected discovery, to a picture of health today?
So I always say the vaccine saved my life, because if I hadn't, you know, had the COVID vaccine, it irritated a lymph node in my lymph. I'd just gone for a run. I was feeling like great, peak form, getting out of my, you know, my rut in COVID and getting back to like really good fitness. And I found this lymph node. And like we knew pretty quickly, my husband's a physician. He knew pretty quickly this was not a good lymph node. And so, you know, I don't know. I think, look, cancer in some ways that year was really magical for me. I mean, I had a group of women that rallied around me. I found the best doctors in the business, and I was very grateful for that. I saw a lot of the inequities that exist for, you know, women going through cancer and women minorities going through cancer. But I guess the way I would sum it up is like, in some ways, my year of cancer was one of the most magical years of my life. It forced me to pause. I took a 6-month leave of absence from work. I learned that you can step out of the work and come back to it. And, time, like, things do continue, and like, you don't become irrelevant by putting your health first and your well-being first. Um, and I learned, like, it was the first time in a long time where I felt like I had a team again. I had a human band of warriors surrounding me. Every Wednesday before I'd go in for Thursday infusions, we'd get on the Peloton, and people from all over the country would join me. And we do a 30-minute ride together, and we would like
That's
text and
awesome.
ping, and it was magic.
There's nothing about community. There's nothing about a community. And I want to stay on that because it's kind of like a little bit of an awkward turn, but because Mary asked this question, she's working to fill the seats at the first ever Women's Beanpot Championship at the TD Garden in Boston in January. How do you get people to fill seats for women's sports? She goes, it can be more challenging. Do you have any best practices for her? You
Oh
don't
my
really
God.
sell tickets, but you do create, interest. You know how to build momentum around
Well,
it.
so I'll tell you, I just had this conversation actually with Arsenal and Chelsea football clubs, because if you go over there and you watch the women's football tournaments that are happening in Europe right now, Arsenal is filling the seats for its major matches, Arsenal women. Chelsea is not. And I think it's because their ticketing strategy is way off over there. What Arsenal does a phenomenal job at is they orient towards families, right? Like,
So we did.
yes, they need to make money on their tickets, but like, think too about the generations that you're raising that you want to become part of this fandom. So I don't know. I guess I go towards, like, I think it's really important to think outside the box, to think about how can you ingratiate yourself to numbers? Like, how can you make this whether it be a family friendly event, whether you make it like a girlfriend's day out event, whether you make it like, think creatively about like how you kind of market around fandom and pull on the insights of your sport specifically to appeal to certain groups that could make it a different experience and bring bigger numbers.
All right, Mary, we want you to report back based on this input and your great talent on how you're able to fill those seats at the Beanpot Championship. Okay, you got that? All right. We've got 1 minute left. Any closing comments for our refreshed community today?
Okay, this is what so the quote I've lived by in my life: the most important thing at any moment is to be willing to sacrifice what you are for what you could become. That has been like this red thread in my life, from being an Olympian, career decisions, through to like flipping the narrative on this like diagnosis around cancer. Like, how does this help me find a new version of myself? So that's what I would leave you guys with. Like, be
That's
willing
pretty
to
powerful.
sacrifice at any moment what you are for
Yeah,
what you
and
become.
I'm hoping that you'll be able to share that on April 5th when you come to Generation W this year. Our big thought leadership event, April 5th. Believe. You make us believe in the goodness of the world. So I wrote that. I love this idea of adults' insatiable curiosity, right? Giving ourselves permission to try things on all the time. We don't need an excuse for it. It should just become part of who we are. And I'll reiterate what you said. Sacrifice what you are to what you can become. I'm gonna stay with that all day.
I love
Kate,
it.
I know that you have to run. I'm going to spend a couple more minutes. We'll catch up at another time. Thank you, thank you, thank
Thanks,
you. You
everybody.
are a relentless champion for change, and we appreciate all that you're doing. All right, have a great afternoon. And let me just remind everybody here, we will be back. There's this whole thing about doing good and feeling good, and we thought, going into the holidays, wouldn't it be great to hear some really good feel-good stories about people who are doing some really feel-good work, maybe inspire us to take on some more feel-good work, right, on what we can become. And so what's our date on that, Sherry? Let me just take a quick look here. I have it in my notes. December 13th. It's our final show of this, I guess, half of the year before we all break for the holidays. So we have Belinda Ohmer, Malia Guerba, and Jamie Olkin, our resident psychotherapist, who will talk about not only the brain waves and why it's so good for us to take on these kind of feel good, do good things, give us this insights, but actually learning about real projects on the ground where people are changing other people's lives for the good, do good. April 5th, make sure you mark your calendar, whether it's virtual or in person here in Jacksonville. And please do follow us. If you want to know what's going on, that's the way to do it. GenWnow.com. Thank you for Kate for taking time out of her actually global gathering at Google to join us today. And thank all of you. Like I said, when we started, I am grateful. I am grateful to the Generation W community, for our team. Thank you, Sherry. Thank you, Ariel, for everybody who makes this possible. And we will see you on December 13th. Mark your calendars. Take care, everyone.